copyright should expire. Like there's no value. Like it's not further incentivizing the Beatles to make the music that they originally made for their descendants. Yeah, but like Paul McCartney is still alive, but I think he lost any interest in the Beatles back catalog quite a few years ago. But when you have real differentiating technology, if it really meets a real need that's out there, you don't have to do viral marketing. Like if you meet the need, people are going to want it. The name Bitcoin is an obvious homage to BitTorrent. It's an overt homage to BitTorrent. This is not some conspiracy theory or anything. That was clearly the explicit intention of the name. People will post their stuff to YouTube, even if they post like a higher quality version to their own site, because YouTube actually gets them views. I've attempted to be entertained watching movies, and I give up. I'm much more interested in the tech than the actual content.
Today I'm sitting down with Bram Cohen, who is best known as the author of the BitTorrent protocol. BitTorrent has had over 2 billion historical installations to date, and at its peak, BitTorrent had over 170 million monthly users. Prior to BitTorrent, Bram worked at several .com companies, which among other things, those companies developed file sharing, peer-to-peer messaging, and a digital cash while using cryptography for encryption. Bram's contributions to peer-to-peer decentralization may have been one of the inspirations to Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin. Satoshi himself once wrote, "For transferable proof-of-work tokens to have value, they must have monetary value. To have monetary value, they must be transferred within a very large network. For example, a file trading network akin to BitTorrent." That's pretty dope if you ask me. Bram is a real OG, so I wanted to sit down with Bram to understand the origin of BitTorrent, what inspired him to build it, what he learned from his experiences, and his thoughts on Bitcoin and where he sees Bitcoin's future. So with that said, let's dive in with the one and only Bram Cohen. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like and comment below. And to find future episodes in your feed and push notifications, make sure you subscribe. And if you click the little bell, you'll get every new episode as it's released. Thanks again for watching. Bram, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Bram, I start the interview with the first question. Who is in your top 5? Tell us the 5 people that you are surrounding yourself with the most these days.
Well, it's hard to be surrounded by much of anyone at the moment. Let's see. Well, my company is not huge, but pretty big now. So I wind up talking to management more than other things. So let's see. So there's Gene Hoffman is the COO at Chia. And there's Bill Blanky and Straya Markovic, and I guess Earl are managing engineering. So they run the meetings, the engineering meetings that I'm in. There's Paul Hainsworth is the PM at Chia. So I was the only PM, and then he was brought in to be the head of product. We just hired another product person. I think I'm up to 5 now. But yeah.
Cool. And so these are people that have, I'm guessing, extensive history within the internet space as well?
Yes. Some of them go way, way back in cryptography generally. And some of them are entrepreneurs themselves.
Cool. I want to go back to your early years. We do this on the show. Just tell us where you grew up, if you could, maybe a little bit about your parents, siblings, if you have, and your socioeconomic conditions as a kid. I'd like to hear your childhood a little bit.
So I grew up in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. My dad taught me to program when I was really young. I went to public schools, and then I went to Stuyvesant High School there, and I was on the math team at Stuyvesant. I was a programming prodigy as a kid. There wasn't much programming to be done at the time. It was kind of early for computers, but there was a Core Wars programming competition that I entered into when I was 12 and did fairly well on. Yeah, there's another bit of trivia. There was a thing called C-Robots, where you programmed robots that shot at each other. You programmed to control them. And that one, I wrote something that there were some issues with it, but I wrote something that just slaughtered the whole suite of robots that it came with. I was able to do that. But there wasn't, pre-internet, it's not like there was a tournament you could enter into, right? Like Core Wars was notable because actually Douglas Hofstadter, I don't remember if he came up with it or was just popularizing it, but he actually ran a tournament for it, and that was the one I entered into. So that was kind of neat. Let's see, but I was mostly doing math team at the time. And I had while I was in high school, I was writing stuff to do stochastic solving of like 3-coloring things and stuff just for fun. And because I was friends with a professor at NYU, I wound up meeting someone who was at Bell Labs, Bart Selman, who was working on that kind of stuff. And I wound up getting an internship at Bell Labs. Bell Labs being there's no equivalent entity today. It was AT&T's research group, which was kind of like US government lab. So it was this weird like thing that acted like it was an academic thing, even though it was at a private institution. Anyway, while I was there, I came up with WalkSat, which is basically the dominant way to this day for stochastically solving satisfiability problems. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but in general, in computer science, if you encounter some problem like scheduling or something like that, it's kind of foolish to write a custom solver for it yourself. What you do is you write a SAT encoder, so a way of expressing that in a standard format where something that actually doesn't know anything about the problem per se and is just a exhaustive search thing can work on it. And that's called a SAT encoding, satisfiability encoding. And you do that because the general purpose SAT solver will just completely obliterate any custom solver you wrote for it yourself. It's this weird counterintuitive thing. You just assume that you have some special understanding and knowledge of the structure of the problem that you can use in a custom solver you write yourself. And that turns out to only very, very rarely actually be the case. But the variant, so when you're solving them, there's kind of two approaches, either an exhaustive search, which is guaranteed to tell you that there's a solution if there is one, or one that's stochastic, where it's just kind of messing with it, trying to find a solution, but not guaranteed to search the entire space. The benefit of that approach is it's much more likely to find a solution on problems that are too big for exhaustive search to actually work, to actually finish, to guaranteed finish. So WalkSet is a tweak to the approach, to the ways of doing the mess around with it until you find a solution thing. That's kind of the basis to this day for how all those things work. So I came up with that when I was in high school. And then I went to college, and then I dropped out and I started working at startups. I moved to San Francisco. It's kind of...
So your father, what your father was a programmer?
Yeah, well, he actually went back to school and became a professor of computer science. But he was actually a journalist when he
really
was like teaching. He did, he did computers just as a hobby for fun.
Interesting. When you were a little kid, and then he decided to go back to school.
Yeah.
I guess he saw, he was like, my kid's killing it. I've got to keep up with him.
No, he went back to school around the same time I did, and he didn't drop out. I did. Although technically speaking, he dropped out of college many, many years before I did. So
it runs in the family. That's great. Yeah. Let's skip ahead. So you go to in the 90s now. So you drop out of school and you see the .com movement happening. You're a developer, and so you start to work. Why don't you tell me a couple of the companies that you had worked for?
I worked at a bunch of startups you've never heard of. So I worked at a company called EarthWeb in New York City, which was kind of a ridiculous .com. And I worked on a project called Mojo Nation.
I read about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mojo Nation was a cryptocurrency company. If Ripple's a cryptocurrency, Mojo Nation was a cryptocurrency. The idea with Mojo Nation was that it would have an online token that was being used to trade for services of bandwidth sharing online, and that there would be value in the token, and that was the business model. Should sound, and then people were paying for storage services with it. I mean, this might sound kind of familiar, because people keep trying to rebuild this, and I keep telling everyone, Mojo Nation's not going to happen. Stop trying to make Mojo Nation happen. But Mojo Nation was doomed for a long list of reasons. That it had, well, for starters, it's kind of hard to have a successful cryptocurrency company when mining hasn't been invented yet. So kind of missing some crucial stuff there. It was also doing the business model all wrong of trying to do it with bandwidth. It was, I mean, we didn't know what we were doing really in terms of software development. That didn't help either. There were a lot of problems with it. Another one was there was a lot of hyperinflation in it because also didn't know how to do just a schedule of emissions from the thing. So I came across, unfortunately, I couldn't find it again later. There was some discussion among academics who had studied it. I believe one of them was Ian Goldberg, actually, where they were saying that, you know, Mojo Nation had this big problem that it was just handing out too much of it so people could actually do stuff. And the spigots just caused problems. And from that, they had this recommendation of having basically a test net and a main net where you screw around with the test net. It's not worth anything. And then you have a main net, which actually is worth something. And you're very strict about the emissions schedule on that. And I guess Satoshi saw that and took their advice and did exactly that. But yeah, Mojo Nation really was this like glorious failure, right? If only all failures could be that successful. It itself was doomed and didn't succeed, but it led to a huge number of very successful things later. It was kind of the necessary precursor to all kinds of stuff, sort of the pre-Bitcoin testnet kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's what I said in the intro. Basically, some of the early companies that you were involved in, I think probably were, and you tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, were those the inspirations and potentially for Bitcoin itself, but also for what you did with BitTorrent?
Mojo Nation was the direct inspiration for BitTorrent.
Yeah.
That of all the stuff I'd worked on at Mojo Nation, with this unbelievable list of features it was theoretically supposed to have, the one thing that really wasn't on the list that I thought I'd made real progress doing was swarming distribution. And so I decided to make a product that was just laser focused just on doing swarming distribution. That was it, nothing else whatsoever. And that was BitTorrent.
So at its peak, you had 170 million monthly users, I read. And since inception, there was over 2 billion downloads or installations of BitTorrent. I mean, that's impressive even by today's standards. But for the audience, if you don't mind, I want to just say something. I want to go over some numbers here because a lot of people watching this, they could be like 25 years old, 30 years old. They didn't kind of live through it like we did. So I just want to explain to the audience a little bit how impressive this is. In 2001, 54% of Americans were using the internet, which was about 143 million people. Globally, in 2001, there was 458 million people using the internet. The internet was growing really fast, as you know. So in 1995, we should read some numbers here. In 1995, there were 16 million users. Year by year, ready? 16 million, 36, 70, 147, 248, 304, 458. Now we're at 2001. You had 37% of the addressable market using your product. Now, I just want to point this out because I also was an internet entrepreneur back then. I am nothing like this, right? 2004, I came up with this idea, which today everybody sees YouTube. It was a video sharing idea where you put a video up, give them an embed code, they can copy and paste it, put it on a MySpace page. So if you were in 2005, if you were on MySpace, you saw a music video, there was like a 95% chance it was coming from music video codes, which I created, right? Now we had 40 million users, Bram, okay? 40 million users in 2005, there was 888 million people on the internet back then. So that was 4.5% of the market share. I had a quarter of your audience 4 years later. But 4 years later is a big deal because you had 37% of the market share back then, right? So while I had 40 million and it's only a quarter of what you have, I didn't have the market share you had. And obviously BitTorrent kept growing, right? So what I also want to point out is that I have, because this is why I have so much respect for what you did. In 2007, that company, by the way, got sued by Universal Music. We're going to go through licensing and copyright crap in a few minutes, right? So I was one of the casualties. We went bankrupt. Then I came up with a video ad network, right? So I sold it in 2015. A year later, we did about $36 million. I was just talking about my wife with this earlier. She's my co-founder. And I was preparing for the interview. And I said, we had $36 million in revenue in 2016, okay? We did about an average of $2 CPM is what the average was across the network, okay? That's globally, okay? So yeah, it's about $2 CPM because US was most of our traffic. We had a higher CPM in the US. Okay, so $2 CPM.
Yeah, At BitTorrent, we were doing like 10 cents CPM and thought it was pretty good.
Well, we did all video. It was all video, right? But this is the thing. We were reaching 1.5 billion users a month. At the time, there was, now you're ready. You had 458 million in 2001. By 2016, there were 3.6 billion people using the internet, right? So the growth is insane, right? So we had 1.5 billion. This is about 41% of the internet that we reached. There's a big difference though. They didn't choose to use Yashi. They would go on like YouTube or CNN and they just saw the ad. They're like, God damn it, skip. They hated us, right? We weren't providing value to people. We were providing value to the advertiser and to the website owners. People decided to use your product and addictively using it all day long. I can't explain or express to the audience enough how impressive those numbers were in 2001. I mean, honestly, my hat is off to you. It's unbelievable. Today, just so the people understand, there's over 5 billion people using the internet. It's still growing, but the growth ahead is nothing like it was back then. So I just want to know, how the hell did you get that much adoption that early? Because it's like you could have a great idea, but it wasn't inherently viral like mine was. People took a video, they saw it, they clicked it, they copied it, and it would just replicate very fast. How did you do it?
Well, the viral loop, I mean, it's very much a build a better mousetrap kind of a thing. And from a product standpoint, there's a lot of making a general purpose tool. So the idea with BitTorrent is someone wants to download a file, right? And they get the file using whatever technology whoever made the file available decided to use, right? So back then, and I think you might be a little generous to my numbers because my peak was not in 2001, it was later. So it was a few years off, but yeah. But at the time, bandwidth was so expensive that you really just could not afford to host things of that size. It just wasn't going to happen. You would go under like immediately. Yep. And this was even before YouTube, and YouTube was like a money burning machine for a number of years.
I know.
So the people who wanted to make big files available really had no choice but to use BitTorrent. Now, of course, there's this underlying thing going on here, which is a lot of this was pirated content. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, if you have a situation where your users prefer the pirate experience, right? You have a situation where let's assume that both the pirate and the not pirate experience are completely legal and completely free, right? So we flattened out their differentiators, right? Which of those experiences are your users going to go ahead and use? And if the answer is the pirate experience, you have nobody to blame for the piracy but yourself. And there was a period of years where there was just this flat policy of you would not get to watch movies on the internet, period, full stop, end of story. You must see it in a theater or rent a DVD or watch it on television, and you are not allowed to have it on the internet with any experience whatsoever. Which seems crazy, right? Like watching something on demand on the internet is just such a ridiculously superior experience.
I mean, honestly, Bram, in 2003, you went to CNN.com. You had to have a subscription on CNBC and CNN to watch the video content. It was ridiculous. You had to pay. Yeah. I was like, what? You can't put an advertiser in front of this? Like, they have all the TV advertisers. It made no sense, you know?
Yeah, you had to pay to watch the news, which is ridiculous. So, but this continues to this day. Like, you might notice that the amount that it costs to rent a movie on like the different services is exactly the same across all of them. And that's because literally the terms are dictated, that you can't any vendor who's doing legal video watching on their thing just has the terms of how they have to price it, how they have to let their users watch it, completely dictated. And they can't even pay it themselves out of pocket. They're literally not allowed to give discounts that they themselves eat on things just by their
part
contracts.
Of their licensing agreement.
Ridiculous. Yeah. And a lot of the Netflix origin story was a whole bunch of hacks, right? That in the early days of Netflix, that was when people still preferred DVD to watching it online because it was so hard to watch because of bandwidth issues, basically. and there's doctrine of first sale on DVDs. So the powers that be literally legally were not allowed to tell Netflix what to do with their DVD subscription service, so they could actually set up a subscription service, and they couldn't be told that they couldn't do that as just this legal hack. And then later on, I believe they acquired Starz, which had a very loose licensing agreement. And because they inherited that licensing agreement, which was transferable on change of ownership, then that allowed Netflix to have basically everything for a while. And then that ended, and now Netflix does not have basically everything. Netflix has not very great selection. And since then, they learned from that, I guess. Now, whenever there's any licensing agreements, they terminate on change of control. and there's
I got to tell you this, because you're telling me this, reminds me of a story. I sat down with Judy McGrath. She was the CEO at MTV back in 2006, and they were looking at buying our company, and they did not, obviously, but she told me, I said, you guys have a licensing agreement for all these music videos that you've been put on television, correct? She goes, yes, we pay zero licensing. And they've made a huge mistake at the labels, and they're not going to make that mistake for new media, which is the internet. She's like, so for television, we don't pay anything. It was considered quote unquote promotional value, right? She's like, but this is a new medium. So they have different licensing for every medium, whether it's radio, television, et cetera, right? And so for video on the internet, they were defining and coming up with the licensing terms, which obviously they have today with everybody, but they didn't have that in 2004 and 2005. It wasn't really defined yet.
Well, it's back to that again with music videos. Everybody puts their music videos up on YouTube explicitly to get as many people as possible to watch them because it's promotional.
That's right.
But it took a really long time.
They were litigating.
It took like a decade for them to figure out that it was just as promotional on the internet.
Bro, I was on a call with Doug Morris, the CEO of Universal, when they were suing us. And I said, the problem is your model is broken. You guys are like an agent for these. You're like an agency for these, for a talent agency, essentially, right? I go, but you're not recognizing what you really are. You're trying to sell licensing, but nobody wants to buy it. So what you are is you got to get the 360 contract. You know what he said to me was, we have 360 contracts on new artists, but like the Beatles or Michael Jackson, that's not happening. So they have all this legacy content, which they sold. And he's like, and you guys are giving it away for free. So we're not allowing that. He's like, our model is to create content and license it. And your model is to distribute it for free. And we're not allowing that.
Well, there's this big issue, which is copyright should expire. Like there's no value. Like it's not further incentivizing the Beatles to make the music that they originally made for their descendants to keep getting contracts. I mean, like I don't think any of the Beatles own any of their thing anymore. First off,
Bruce Springsteen just sold his album, his whole catalog. Did you see that?
Oh no, I didn't.
A couple of days ago, $500 million.
Yeah, but like Paul McCartney's still alive, but he I think he lost any interest in the Beatles back catalog quite a few years ago. So like it's not, there's no benefit ongoing to anyone but this like decades later, whoever happens to own it thing for copyright to last that long. And it's a tremendous cost to society that it's hard to actually sample this old stuff. And it's just ridiculous. And the general public is not really in favor of this. You ask people, how long should copyright last? And it's like, well, I don't know, like 20 years, maybe 40 years, right? People think those sound like big numbers, but it's like, in the 90s, there was just this general rule of thumb that anything that was high production value was copyright, right? Because like that was what had happened with recording media. But I'll let you in on a little secret. This is a really scary thing. 1980 was over 30 years ago. It's not the case anymore, right? In any sane world, copyright would expire 20 years after publication, because there's nobody has, when people are accounting for funding of even big professional studios, when they're accounting for the production of for the funding of new projects, they don't do projections out more than 20 years anyway. It would have no effect whatsoever on the funding of the production of movies and music if copyright ran out after 20 years. And then we would see today a whole bunch of services that were specializing in stuff that had gone out of copyright that would have very extensive catalogs at this point.
Interestingly, I totally agree with you. It's funny how the government has one agency that goes after companies for having a monopoly, an antitrust case. They have another agency, the USPTO, where they create monopolies, which we're talking about. So it's kind of a funny thing. It's a double-edged sword with the government.
Yeah, well, the patents are worse.
Patents and copyrights are essentially creating a little bit of a monopoly for whoever the entity or person is.
Yeah, well, but with copyright, at least if you've never heard of someone, they usually can't come sue you.
But let me go back to that question though, because like you create the protocol, you build BitTorrent, and how did you get it? I understand the use case is a great technology, but how did you get people to be aware of it? Like with my product, you saw a music video, you click the music video, it brings you to the site, you find your favorite, you copy and paste it, and you replicate, and the viral coefficient was high, and it just exploded. How did you? Was there anything inherently viral within the product that forcibly to use it? It made it more valuable to have your friends use it? How did you do that?
No, it didn't work that way. It was whoever wanted to make a file available.
It was just word of mouth.
Had no choice.
Okay.
And they did it. But because there was this extremely draconian regime trying to make this very valuable experience unavailable online under circumstances whatsoever, it created this massive opportunity. Yeah, that if it was possible for someone to make it available while somehow telling the powers that be to go shove it, there was tremendous demand for it.
So they essentially did the marketing for you by going out there trying to shut down all these different services around file sharing. So people they made it more well aware.
It was the whole like music and movie industry that this was already pre-marketed stuff that people wanted to use. And people wanted to make available as well. I was just helping make it happen.
Okay, so it was a phenomenal thing that just kind of came out of nowhere very rapidly. You got traction really quickly. I mean, the first year or so, you guys started like exploding, right?
Yeah, it was in 2002. It really got picked up in the anime scene first.
Okay.
Which was really weird because at the time, anime in the West was very niche.
Yeah.
But there were these fans who would subtitle things in English and make it available, and generally had this like code of honor that as soon as you could like buy it on DVD, they'd stop distributing it. But that was so little stuff that there was just massive quantities of this stuff that they were putting up. And actually, like a lot of these teams that were translating into English got like hired to do the official translations of these things later because their translations were very good. So it got picked up there first, I think. But yeah, it was just like super quick uptake in terms of adoption of the whole thing. Like when you have real differentiating technology, if it really meets a real need that's out there, you don't have to do viral marketing. Like if you meet the need, people are going to want it, and they're searching for a solution.
But they got to learn about it, right? Even though you have the best technology, it doesn't always win because they're not found. So it's like having the best store in the middle of the woods.
If this is a real pain point for someone that they're actively trying to find a solution for, yes, people with the internet available will probably be able to figure out what they should be doing.
So that brings me to the next question. There are other file services before you, right? And so I guess they were not working as well, and other people were talking and saying, hey, have you heard of BitTorrent? This is even better than the current things that they were using, like a Napster or something, right?
Yeah. So BitTorrent did two things well. Number one, it integrated with the web really, really nicely, because I wasn't about to try and figure out a search service, blah, blah, blah thing. So if you wanted to download something, you just clicked on a link on the web, and you started downloading. That was how it works. So that was a strong positive in its favor in terms of use. It's not like forcing it didn't have its own, here is the BitTorrent thing, and you have to find everything in BitTorrent and stuff. Whoever it is on the web that's doing their thing can use it. Sure. And then the other thing is, just on a pure technical level, it was much more, I mean, people still use it,
yeah, of course.
Much more aggressive about uploading. So instead of simply downloading from multiple peers, which was considered high tech at the time, it actually has this feature that as soon as it starts downloading, it starts uploading. Once it's getting pieces of the file, it kind of announces to its peers which ones it has and does this mix and match kind of trade with peers thing over over what it has. So it's doing a good job of using really all the available upload capacity that all of the peers have.
Let's talk about the licensing. This was the demise of my business. It was not necessarily the demise of yours. We both dealt with this. How did you navigate those waters?
It made my business pretty dysfunctional, right? Like that. If it weren't, it completely hobbled my business in terms of ability to do much of anything. And we did do content deals and set up a store, but it was so hobbled in terms of the experience that it had that it did just extremely nominal sales. No one was interested in it. That if you're stuck using the terms that you're required to have in terms of what your end user experience is, then your only way to do it is to do the thing that YouTube and Amazon Prime Video are doing now, which is you have a very good end user experience for some other reason. You got massive users already watching videos on your thing. And then maybe because you've set up this broader good experience, your users will be willing to watch some of these like Hollywood videos at pretty ridiculous rates of like $4 to watch it once, which is kind of ridiculous on your service. But those terms and that catalog by themselves are not enough to get users using it in any way. That's people aren't interested in that.
So I had hit lightning in the bottle, kind of like you did, right? Came up with this thing. I didn't realize at the time, it was the #1 music site on ComScore and Nielsen, which put me on the radar for the labels, right? So they started reaching out. I realized very quickly talking to their litigators are calling me and stuff. This guy, Mr. Weinstein, I'll never forget. And I had to sign a licensing agreement or I'd be sued into oblivion basically, right? So I signed a licensing agreement. I later sold the company to a company in New York City, Bolt.com. It was the first social network in 1996. And upon buying my business, within the first month, they saw this invoice come in from Universal Music and EMI and BMI, all these different companies, Sony. And they were like, we don't have to pay this. We're protected under DMCA. And I was like, I think you should fucking pay it. I was like, you're crazy. Let's pay it. It wasn't that much. It was tens of thousands of dollars a month. I was like, just pay the licensing and we'll figure this out. I negotiated, Bram, where we only had to pay for the licensing for the video on our site. But if it was a third party where they copy and pasted it, they had to go after those sites like a MySpace or something like that. We stopped paying it, and a year and a half later, they sued us, MySpace, and everybody else. It was like, it was the demise of our business, essentially. Did you have licensing that you set up with them? And that's what you're saying, it contracted the growth of the company as a result of the licensing?
Yeah, well, we had this licensing that people weren't aware of that was on BitTorrent.com. And I mean, maybe that helped us not get sued for a while.
Yes.
They also wouldn't have wanted to try and sue BitTorrent because they'd probably have lost that because we weren't actually doing any pirating ourselves.
We weren't either. The users were uploading it. Yeah.
So yeah, the mistake you're talking about there was you had your own hosting that you were doing, and you had an agreement about how much that would cost you. And that was not paying. That was stupid. Like that you needed to pay. Third party stuff you're not responsible for.
No. I want to be very clear. I just want to be clear for your understanding. If you were a user, you came and you uploaded it like YouTube. We hosted the file. We didn't go and find it and upload it. So it's under DMCA, as you know, they have to give us a takedown notice. We could take it off. And the problem was our guys were saying, we're not paying licensing for somebody that uploaded the music. And I was like, guys, that's what they expect. It's all about expectations. Let's just keep paying the licensing. And that was stupid to not pay.
Yeah, that was stupid. I think legally speaking, that was technically in the right.
It was. We didn't have the money to defend it though. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well,
being right and surviving are two different things.
Right. Well, that's part of the ridiculousness of the whole thing.
Yes.
Is copyright inherently means that in order to play the game, you need deep pockets and a lot of lawyers. And that's not how technology works. That's not a formula for coming up with good tech. Because guess what? People who are good at making tech, generally speaking, don't have deep pockets, and they're not lawyers.
I knew Roloff Botha, and he's from Sequoia, and basically the reason why they sold to Google was because they couldn't defend these lawsuits. It cost Google $100 million to defend the Viacom lawsuit.
Yeah, well, YouTube was a very weird thing that it was a money burning machine. It did not work both on a.
It does at scale though.
Yeah, both on a business and legal level, it was doomed. That it was burning. It had no way of making money, and it had no way of avoiding getting sued into oblivion. Not that it wouldn't win, but it couldn't afford it.
They couldn't do it on their own. Yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't do it on their own. Now, it was still a very valuable thing. Now, the thing is, BitTorrent was just too radioactive for anyone to touch.
Yeah.
But YouTube had enough going on that they could get acquired by Google, because Google was, people don't remember that there was like Google Video or whatever they called it. Google had their Google Video site. And then essentially what it appears happened is they basically took YouTube and they moved it over to this infrastructure that they built. So Google had the necessary negotiating power with peering on the internet to make it stop burning money by just making it serve video out of deals where they were directly peering with everyone, and had the necessary deep pockets to defend the lawsuits. And that's how they got YouTube to work. Of course, it's really, really hard to set up a competitor to YouTube because you have to do it all over again.
Well, you can't do it now because of network effects. It's impossible now.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is YouTube. YouTube is like a weird thing now. You have these like video specialties. There's like Twitch and sure. YouTube, yep. And I don't know if there are any others actually. It's that people will post their stuff to YouTube even if they post like a higher quality version to their own site, because YouTube actually gets them views on their things.
Basically it's a repository of all the videos in the world, and the consumers keep coming there, which creates a perpetual loop, viral loop or feedback loop rather, where the uploaders go and then the consumers come, and it just doesn't end, right? Perpetually continues on indefinitely, unless you said earlier, unless you can have something that has a 10x better, 100x better. I don't see what that is. It could come in the future. It's just not there right now.
Yeah, well, and you get these companies like Google and Amazon who really won by making a better product. So, or even like Facebook, right? So they're not about to be supplanted by someone who makes something vastly better, because they did that to others, and they're not so old that they've forgotten how to do it yet. Right. So they continue to innovate and improve on those things, and that's how they stick around and appear to be completely unapproachable. This is pretty good for consumers because they continue to make a good product, but it's not like but you definitely have, in the more professional side of video, it continues to be ruled by copyright in this terrible way that like Netflix used to actually be pretty good because it had everything, and now it doesn't. And so now you have Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and and HBO and whatever else there is. And each of these, if you add up the cost of all of these, it's like what cable costs, right? And everybody only wants like one of the shows on all these things. And actually, I've actually given up on watching video myself. Like that I've attempted to be entertained watching movies, and I give up.
And this is from the founder of BitTorrent, guys.
Well, I was never that into it, actually, oddly enough. I'm much more interested in the tech than the actual content. Although I've looked into like screenwriting and things like that. And the problem is once you learn it, like when you watch movies, you're not immersed in the story. You're watching the mechanics of what it's doing. And when you learn what the Hollywood propaganda lines are, they just become so obvious that the stories just get like childish, right? Like you have these things. The worst of them is like torture is an effective form of interrogation. It is a very common thing that there's like a torture interrogation scene in like every fucking movie, even in like children's movies and like Zootopia and stuff. Like, and you don't think about it until you realize that it's there, and then you start seeing, wait, why is Hollywood obsessed with this really super specific, completely artificial, and really, really icky bad bit of propaganda messaging? Another one that's been turning up a lot recently is all sex work is human trafficking is another thing that they've been pushing a lot lately. There are a few things like that which just make it like, just make it not much fun to watch movies when you know that that's going on. You can spot it.
I got a question for you. So how does it feel to have built this protocol that is going to outlive you, like, and in its name too, like torrent? I mean, the people are going to be talking about this for generations. That's pretty impressive. I mean, it's got to feel amazing.
Well, I've always, since I was young, I really wanted to make things that would outlast me a really long time. So I actually I invent puzzles as a hobby, and part of that, mechanical puzzles, and part of the reason for that specific medium is that it's such a universal medium that that people can still be playing with your stuff like hundreds of years in the future, because things haven't changed that much. You know, the nature of mechanical objects hasn't really changed. So like here's a puzzle I invented relatively recently. It's let's see here. So it's
go up a little higher.
So here, so this is it. Okay, this is it in the start state, and then you can do this whole. It takes like a minute to get this apart completely, but this. Let's see how quickly I can do this. There we go. Getting there. Okay. There we go. Almost. All right. So here, the piece is just, they all like
break apart. Yeah.
This is just, yeah. All right. And then it goes back together again. The funny thing about this puzzle, these pieces are all the same, or well, they're left and right-handed versions of the same thing. And it's a binary burr with like no cage. So if you start with more pieces, it actually just takes longer to put it together, but it still works up to like an unlimited number of pieces. So this is a puzzle I invented. So I invent mechanical puzzles. So
you've always tried to build things of legacy, so to speak. It's something that will last.
Yeah, it's something I always think about. I mean, even to the point of thinking about like if you're doing music, right? We're scheduled a couple hundred years from now. The Skynet is gonna gain consciousness and wipe out us all. And the thing is with music, like you need a human brain to appreciate human music. That like if space aliens land on planet Earth, right? There would be an expectation that you could show them a sculpture or a mechanical puzzle or various things like this, and they would be able to understand them and appreciate them on some level. It would be, well, alien to them, but they would at least have some idea what was going on. But if you played music for them, they would be like, I don't know. Like there would be, well, some amount of cultural, some amount of innate human brain stuff. I've spent a lot of time studying this. There's a lot of really interesting stuff about what is innate in music. And there's these things about there's a certain range of tones where the melodic line is, and then in and you know, these human mating calls, they start at a note and then they rise up and they noodle around and then they resolve back down again. These are very inherent structures that are pretty universal across music.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's just what are the chords? What are the positions of consonants and dissonance, which there is sort of kind of a physiological basis for those, but not really. Like it wouldn't necessarily have to be that way. And those are things that you just would not expect a space alien to have a brain that worked exactly the same way.
Yeah, and that's probably the way we evolved, to your point, right? And they may not have evolved this way. We communicated through bonfires and singing and this kind of stuff for thousands of years, right? So it is innate in our DNA at this point.
Yeah, it's not clear. Music is complicated, so there's a few things that are physiological, like the overtones that are made from our talking have a physical basis to them, and an open pipe instrument like our throat and a plucked string both make this particular series of overtones. But then how those are parsed and interpreted and what causes consonance and dissonance across those, that is built into the human brain. And then there's a bunch of other things about how that's interpreted that are very cultural. But just because it's cultural doesn't mean that it's not baked into you, because you were trained in it when you were super young and it can't be changed now. But definitely that it's not super universal, right? And even within us humans, you can hear music from generations past. And it sounds like music to you because you have a human brain and can parse it. But it's not like music is always of its time and place. It's for a culture, it's for a people. And this is a lot of why it's exceedingly rare for an older person to like write a hit song, because you have to kind of speak for a people and be big on what is the trend at the time, because it's part of this group's identity. And it's always young people who are finding their identity, who identify more strongly with music. And by design, it's different from what came before. It's trying to carve out its own niche. And you have to tap into what it is that they want or are seeking in order to make something that really resonates there.
It's interesting. Like Madonna, she kind of had multiple generations, over the years. I mean, today she doesn't have anything new that's hot, but a lot of these artists, like they're like one little error, to your point. You're absolutely right about that. If you think about the people that you liked when you were younger.
Madonna comes across really badly in the era of the internet because she's the material girl, right? Like she just comes across really badly in interviews as just this shitty person. And pre-internet, when they could control it, she just came across as very fabulous doing this. But her artificiality can't really, her artificiality needed to be hidden much, much better. So you have other pop stars today. I'm getting so old, I'm not even following who's hot anymore. But they kind of create this story behind them, right? Like, what is Lady Gaga like really? Like, we don't actually know what she's actually like, right? There's no, like, maybe she matches that character, maybe she doesn't. I don't know. Madonna the reason she lasted so long was because she was manufactured. She was very, very produced. There was a whole team doing her stuff. It wasn't like she was a strong songwriter pursuing her own personal artistic vision and experimenting with it and evolving and doing different things across records, because you're not going to consistently have number one hits when you do that. Like, you need like a whole team of songwriters who come in and try and tap into what's hot currently and write songs for you to tap into what's big right then, in order to have that kind of like ongoing, continued hit making.
It happens occasionally though. Like, look at Jay-Z. Jay-Z continually, every time he puts out an album, it's just off the charts, right? I mean, it's rare. It's very rare, to your point, but there are some artists that seem to just hit it for years, for decades. I mean, it's pretty rare though.
It does happen. But I don't know. You'd have to talk to them about how they do it. I don't know.
I don't know how they do it either. I want to go back into the BitTorrent story for just a second. In the intro, you heard me read this earlier. In the intro, Satoshi Nakamoto himself said this: for transferable proof of work tokens to have value, they must have monetary value. To have monetary value, they must be transferred within a very large network. For example, a file trading network like BitTorrent. Pretty cool. That's pretty wild. Have you ever heard that quote prior to me saying that one just now? You've heard it, right?
I think so. Like, people have told me that they, like, in the early days of Bitcoin, they would like sit there talking to Satoshi on IRC and they'd be torrenting stuff together.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to ask you, what did you think of that? It's pretty so dope. I mean, what did you think about it? And how? And by the way, also, follow-up question is, when's the first time you heard of Bitcoin, and what did you think at that time relative to your experiences prior?
Well, so first off, the name Bitcoin is an obvious homage to BitTorrent. It's an overt homage to BitTorrent. This is not some conspiracy theory or anything. That was clearly the explicit intention of the name. I just assume, with the kind of sketchy origin story of it being anonymous and stuff, and there being a long history, including things that I'd been involved in, of things which were insecure, right? Like it just used to, when random yabos come up with a new project, it just gets 100% broken technologically. I just assumed it was completely insecure in some way. And the other thing is, people were getting excited about it because of the price of it going up, which was very much against what Satoshi was going for from that quote you were saying. So people argue about Satoshi's vision, and it's actually kind of funny because Satoshi wasn't very big on asset bubbles either. But now I, much to my detriment, hate asset bubbles. I want to build real value in the world and really focus on that. and I just, generally speaking, like, ignore coin price, just keep working on building great technology. Yeah, so I didn't want to touch it for a while.
So when did you hear? Did you hear like around inception? Were you aware of it like right at the beginning, or
like 2013 maybe?
Okay, so it took a while. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'd heard of it before that, but people were pestering me about it. I'm like, go away, go away. I want nothing to do with it. Go away. So people told me, Bram, there actually is some interesting tech under there. You should look into it.
Okay.
And eventually I was like, okay. Yeah. So eventually I started looking into it. So, and around 2014, I got on Bitcoin Wizards, which caused a whole lot of the core devs to jump in and start chatting with me. Because they'd been expecting me for a while. They knew I was going to show up.
They're like, "Where's the BitTorrent guy?"
Yeah. Well, they knew I was going to show up. So I came in, and they would actually answer my stupid questions, which was nice. So at the time, this was like pre-transaction fees in Bitcoin, right? So this is really early. And so I asked the obvious question: what's to stop someone from just publishing lots of transactions? And didn't get a straight answer for a while. And eventually someone's like, oh, well, look here, here's the patch. It shows that there's this maximum block size, which is actually kind of important. I'm like, okay, all right. So that kind of makes sense. And we had a discussion. It's like, yeah, so there's this plan that there will be real transaction fees and a market for transaction fees when we actually get there, yada, 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 was the plan, right? Like, and then there was this hard fork war later on where people wanted to just increase that number, and it's like, no, we're not increasing the number. Anyway, this was around 2014. I started really doing a lot of deep dives into it, and the documentation was really, really horrible at the time, and even just a basic explanation of what Satoshi's big idea was hard to come by. That there was this big technical artifact, and Satoshi had written a paper, a white paper, this weirdly formatted thing, kind of explaining it not super well. But from a computer science standpoint, it's not a complicated thing to explain. It just hadn't been explained very well. It's the idea is we have a secure distributed database, right? Like, it's hard to make a secure distributed database. It's easy to make something that's two of the three. It's hard to make something that's all three. How do you make it so that you don't have either the case that new people coming in are locked out from participating in it, or that if they aren't locked out, how do you keep someone from just introducing a whole lot of malicious actors and overwhelming the system and taking control of it that way? And there's an answer to that, which is, well, we're going to have our database have a blockchain. We're going to have this history of the database, where we just keep adding on top of it over time. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it so there's a certain amount of blood, sweat, and tears that have to go into making each of these blocks. That you can't just do it. You need to put some real world resource that's verifiable that you put this stuff into these things. These are called dead beefs, is the term of art for these things. And if you and I get into an argument about what the current state of the database is, we look at the versions of the blockchain we have, and whichever one weighs more wins. Whichever one had more blood, sweat, and tears go into it is the one who has the lesser one acquiesces to the person who has more. Now, you design it so that the vast majority of the time, all that's happening here is something new is being added to the top. So nothing is being undone. You're just adding on top of it as it goes forward. And once something has been there for a while and has buried under a whole lot of other stuff, you can be very certain it's not going to retroactively change. And then there's the next question of like, okay, well, that's great and all, but how do we get people to actually expend these resources doing this? This is going to cost real money. And the answer is, well, we're going to make the database be a database of money, and it will pay people in the money that it keeps track of to incentivize this activity. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of understandable version of what's going on here. And if you kind of dig into I've never looked at the original Bitcoin code base, but if you kind of dig into how the Bitcoin protocol works, it's kind of interesting what Satoshi did well and poorly. There's a lot of subtleties to things around like work difficulty resets and when do blocks qualify, and are there heavier or lighter blocks, or are they just a threshold? Things like that. Those were done really, really well, like weirdly well. Like Satoshi had clearly spent a lot of time thinking about that and iterating on it, and really never even explained why certain very well thought out decisions were done. And I had to go in and work out after the fact what was going on, like what was the theory behind those things. But then at the same time, the message formats are garbage. Like, Satoshi did really, really horrible job with those. So interesting mix of strengths and weaknesses with Satoshi there.
So you discovered this in 2013, 2014, you start like researching and looking. Did you buy Bitcoin back then? When did you first purchase?
No, I've never bought Bitcoin.
You never bought Bitcoin?
No.
Wow. Okay.
Well, because I didn't want to contribute to the waste. It's funny, like all that stuff people talk about now, like Satoshi's original post saying, "Okay, here's Bitcoin, it's up." John Gilmore immediately responded saying, "It would be nice if we could do this without having so much energy burnt doing nothing." It's like an immediate response to that. And it was really because of that I didn't want to, contribute to the pushing the price.
Well, the narrative has clearly shifted from what it originally was in the white paper to what people talk about it today. People talk about today with the 0% interest rates and being forced into risk assets, which we're all over the world are forced into that because of inflation. It's like this hedge essentially. So from that perspective, do you see that it's not a waste now, that it's a way for people to store value?
Well, these are two different issues, right? Like there's what are the semantics of Bitcoin as a database?
Yeah.
And then there's what is being done to secure Bitcoin, right? And people often confuse this. It's this weirdly, like, there's some bizarrely Marxist libertarians who are Bitcoin partisans who will argue that the amount of value that Bitcoin has is by definition equal to the amount of like energy that went into creating it, which is literally the labor theory of value. It's like totally Marxist. It's this strange crank economic theory. What creates Bitcoin's value as a medium of exchange is just supply and demand, right? Like some people have it, some people want it. There's a market. It sets a price.
But there's a reason for the demand, right? Which I was trying to outline. Do you believe in that reason?
There are lots of reasons for the demand. But the mining process does not create the demand. That's just crank economic thinking. The mining process does create supply for the thing. So that enters into it. You have in security in general, there's this question of how much is security worth really? Like what should you be paying for security? And the security by definition, like the definition of security is things that have to be done just because people suck. like if people were just honest and trustworthy, by definition, you would have no need to have any security measures whatsoever. But in the world, unfortunately, people are not all honest and trustworthy, right? Now, the counterfactual of people being honest and trustworthy can get absurd at times, right? For something like Bitcoin, the counterfactual is everyone just remembers how many tokens they have and doesn't lie about it and keeps track of this all very judiciously themselves. And because of that, the world moves forward, and you have this very scalable thing that can work completely offline with how transactions work. Obviously, the world does not work that way. If the world worked that way, we wouldn't need paper cash, right? In the pre-internet world, because people are not trustworthy. This is the whole thing with money, right? Now,
well, you need paper cash because you can't carry a bunch of gold in your back pocket, right?
Well, even if you're using gold, it's kind of the same thing. There's this physical auditing of this process of everyone remembering how much money they have, that you're disallowing them from cheating, right? If people could simply remember the amount and be trusted to accurately represent the amount, then you wouldn't need to do any of this.
You're saying the total supply in the world. Is that what you're saying?
Well, just why is it that we need this security is what I'm talking about. Like, why do we need physical money or gold or Bitcoin or anything, right? Like, it's because people aren't trustworthy. People would lie about how much credit they had. I'm a billionaire. You should give that to me because I'm a billionaire.
I don't see it that way. It's interesting. I'm not seeing where you're coming from. So I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, the reason you don't is because it's so unthinkable to you that this world could ever exist. That you clearly could never have a world in which the amount of societal credits that everyone has, everyone simply remembers for themselves and is honest to everyone else about how much they have.
This is the part I'm like not connecting on. Why do I care what you say you have? I don't really care what your number is or what you say you have. It's what do I have and how do I retain that value over time? That's how I'm viewing this. I'm not viewing this the same way you're talking about it. Yeah.
The reason for it is to make it so that we don't have to bother having Bitcoin or printing physical cash or digging up gold, right? Rather than bother with all this theater, we could just be honest people. But that's not, obviously, that can't work with society as a whole.
And when you say people, our money supply is controlled by the government and they keep printing more of it, right? So they're devaluing the money essentially, right?
Well, you'd have to have some kind of social consensus about what the source of money is, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm simply talking about why is Bitcoin a security product is the question that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Right. And it's because it exists against this counterfactual of not needing it. And this counterfactual would work great if people were a level of trustworthy that's simply unthinkable. It's unimaginable. This is not going to happen. But because this counterfactual does exist as a theoretical, this does mean that Bitcoin is a security product that falls under the regime of being a security thing.
And what is it we're securing, Bram?
What we're securing is we're making it so people can't lie about the amount of Bitcoin they have.
And what is Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is an entry in a database.
Why do we care about how much I have then of an entry in a database?
Well, I don't know. People clearly do. People do care about it somehow. Well, people care about it because kind of this social convention that we care about it. It's a Schelling point of unit of account that people have decided to agree upon.
Right. Which comes back to money. I'm leading towards money, right?
Yeah. It's definitely money. So the interesting question is, how much should you pay for security? How much is security worth really? And it's like, well, it's clearly not worth zero. But then by the same token, it shouldn't be worth the entire value of the thing that it's securing. It should be worth a small fraction of the value of the thing that it's securing, or it's doing more harm than good. It's this very unfortunate thing with Bitcoin mining is it's extremely, extremely costly, not for a deep reason not for a monetary reason. From a money standpoint, there's no reason for it to be this costly. But from a security standpoint, due to just technical aspects, there are. But just because of how it works, because it's very, very hard to have a secure distributed database, so you take what you can get.
We talked about this in chat, me and you and James, right? And we were kind of going through this a little bit. I want to get to that in a minute, but let's just back up for 1 second. So I was talking to American Hollow yesterday, and I said, I'm interviewing you for the show. And I said, give me a good question for him. And I'm just going to go off topic for 1 second. It's in the topic, but it's a little off topic. He said, you got to ask him if he thinks that Len Sassaman was Satoshi Nakamoto. Do you believe that?
Oh, well, there's no way to tell.
What do you believe?
What do I believe? These are things that were very traumatic for me. Len was my best friend, and he took his own life. And I really hope that Satoshi was some rando. So somebody out there who's alive and well today, who's probably run into me at something, and I really hope I haven't made a complete ass out of myself when he fanboyed me. But if you look at Satoshi's MO of write something anonymously or pseudonymously, post about it to cypherpunks, mouth off on it a lot, and then disappear. That was what Len did, like a lot. That was like his life. And I didn't even know what his handles on the cypherpunks list were. Like I knew he had them. And then he killed them a few times. It's kind of this low grade. When people are suicidal, they will sometimes do this like low grade suicide where they don't really want to kill themselves. So they kill the pseudonym rather than killing themselves.
To see while you're still alive how people react to it almost.
No, it's not. It's to kill the pseudonym. It's actually to wipe it out. Yeah. So Len didn't seem to have the technical skills for it, but his technical skills had improved a lot over time since I had first met him. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is he was friends with Hal, who I also knew, but not nearly as well. And Hal also did the same thing. And Hal was much more of a coder than Len was. And also, he'd actually...
Didn't they develop like remailers and stuff to that nature? And they were doing all this.
Yeah, Len was working on anonymous remailers. Hal had been... Hal was like the sort of unacknowledged PGP founder who did the technical work on it. So by those metrics, if you go, well, maybe Satoshi could have been like Hal actually wrote it and Len did all the like human language posting. Right. That fits really well actually with what we know. Definitely in terms of all the people who are put forth as potential Satoshi candidates, most of them are just ridiculous. Just clearly, what are you talking about? Like I'm more likely to be Satoshi than that person is by like some kind of like Fight Club dual personality. I don't remember having done it kind of a thing is more likely to me than that person than like Craig Wright, for example.
I also read that they embedded on every node of the Bitcoin network an obituary of Len, where he's basically like immortalized within a block.
Yeah, kind of hacked into the blockchain. So Dan Kaminsky, who passed away this year, who was also the person who convinced me I should actually look into Bitcoin. He made a transaction that had a bunch of outputs that made an ASCII art rendering of a picture of Len and said some stuff.
I was looking at that this morning. It's amazing. There's a lot to this. I mean, I'm surprised that Hodl was like, you got to look into this. And I started reading about it all this morning and I was like, holy shit, I didn't know about this. So there's something here. Like, we'll never know, to your point, but just the fact that you guys are best friends, you're roommates and stuff. I was just curious what your thoughts were.
Yeah.
What did you, let me ask you about Bitcoin for one more second, and then I want to get into Chia but I want to ask you, what did you initially understand about Bitcoin what did you initially not understand about Bitcoin that you now understand about Bitcoin when you first heard about it or looked into it?
Well, the first thing is the thing I was just talking about. Like, what is this thing? What is it? Right. And the simple answer of it's a secure distributed database. And here's the consensus algorithm it uses. That's the core idea. That is what Nakamoto consensus is. And that's something where I think if you're explaining Bitcoin to computer scientists, that's what you have to lead with, is explaining that. And especially when I was first looking into it, like the concept of proofs of work, if you are a cryptographer, proofs of work are just obvious. They're barely worth discussing as an invention. Like, obviously, you can have partial hash collisions. That's like, we go through all this work in secure hashes to make it so you can't have a total hash collision. Obviously, you can have partial hash collisions. This is an invention. So it's obvious. It's completely obvious. The invention is, how do you use it? What do you do with it, right? And Satoshi invented Nakamoto consensus, was his big invention there. So that's kind of how you explain it. And like I said, a lot of really deep, well done things about work difficulty resets and things around that. Those are pretty interesting. There's also like the UTXO model is a good thing. Thing you have to understand about Chia. basically, there's these core principles of how Bitcoin works, right? That you have a Nakamoto consensus. So it's a truly secure, it truly is decentralized. Everyone on it today could leave, a whole new set of people could come in. It could chug along no problem, right? Actually, there's a bunch of things that Satoshi wanted that didn't pan out. In the original white paper, Satoshi literally says, well, one IP address, one vote can't work, but maybe one CPU, one vote can work, and describes this system where he envisions that most of the cost of mining will be the sunk cost of having manufactured CPUs, which are already in computers sitting around not doing anything. Now, this hasn't panned out, obviously, because number one, custom hardware just obliterates general purpose CPUs for this. And number two, the costs of electricity wind up being greater than the cost of the hardware. But this was, Satoshi's vision, right? And then there's things like supporting very simple semantics on chain, which are very secure and auditable and reliable in terms of how they work, making it so there's lots and lots of full nodes out there, and the transaction rate isn't so high that you can't run a full node on an ordinary desktop, and make it so that there's a fee market for getting transactions on chain when things get expensive. These are all good ideas. And these, for Chia, these are all things that I'm doubling down on and improving in many cases. And a lot of Bitcoin maxis say that anything that says this is a better Bitcoin, they will say that anything that claims it's a better Bitcoin is a scam. Now, generally speaking, these criticisms are absolutely correct, that things that say, oh, this is a better Bitcoin because we're introducing unlimited on-chain scaling and we switch to proof of stake and blah, 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 blah. Those aren't a better Bitcoin at all, right? But there's no law of physics reason why someone couldn't actually seriously take Bitcoin, study it deeply, figure out how it all works and how to go about improving on all of those things. Now, it's very, very hard to do that. Bitcoin is at this very broad plateau of functionality that's very hard to improve on. But I've done it. I actually did do it. That we're using Nakamoto consensus. We're working in this kind of cleaned up version of the UTXO model, which is the coin set model, and have like limited on-chain scaling with, so it'll work on general purpose desktop. But we have way more, like almost a factor of 10 more full nodes that exist in the world. We have way more farmers than Bitcoin has miners, which are way more split among many different entities. And the on-chain programming environment keeps Bitcoin's like simple, auditable, reliable nature while actually enabling the kinds of smart transactions you get in Ethereum. Although it's sort of kind of more work to make that happen.
I want to get into your thing in a minute, but I got a few more questions on Bitcoin before we go into it, because we kind of debated this in the chat, so we're going to get into that. But the next question I have is, what do you think a lot of people don't understand about Bitcoin today, and how would you suggest helping these people better understand the truth about Bitcoin? Because you've thought about this very deeply, obviously, because you're developing a derivative of Bitcoin essentially off the UTXO for Chia. So help us understand what they're not understanding.
Well, when you say people, it's like, what people are we talking about here?
The general consensus of people that are involved in the Bitcoin space, what is it that you think they don't understand?
Those people. Okay. That's different from the general public.
Most people don't even know anything about Bitcoin. So
yeah. And then there's also a question, are you talking about people who are interested in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies more generally?
Let's put it this way. What do you think Michael Saylor doesn't understand about Bitcoin? He's got a lot of money in Bitcoin, billions of dollars. What do you think that he needs to better understand? Because he's clearly a maximalist. So if you're not, what is it that he's missing, and what do you think he would have to come up the curb on?
I'm not entirely sure it's fair to say that I'm not a maximalist. I think I'm...
Well, you don't own it.
I think I'm doubling down on all the Bitcoin stuff. I agree about all the technical architectural points. and are working on improving them. I think
I would say by definition, if you don't own Bitcoin, you can't be considered a maximalist.
okay, all right, sure. I mean, fair, but the I think I should be politically aligned in some sense with these people. People are actually talking about ossification as a good thing, and it's not. That the Bitcoin code base is really stagnating pretty badly right now. And a lot of core devs have gotten scared off because they don't like having to beg for money to make a living. And they don't like getting death threats. And they don't like doing things where it's really, really difficult to get anything actually deployed and happening. And this is a real problem. This is a bad thing.
So you think just you're saying that I'm friends with Jimmy Song. He said that's a feature, not a bug.
Well, stability is a feature. Stability and reliability are a feature.
But if you can change something very easily, you might change it for the worse by accident or intentionally.
Yeah. But stagnation is not a feature, right? Like, and you definitely want to try to make it so that you do everything you can at a higher layer, right? That your underlying thing supports a very coherent set of functionality that that makes it so you can add new stuff above it. And also in the case of cryptocurrencies, in the hopefully rare cases where you make any changes, they're not hard forks, they're soft forks, which I 100% believe in. But Bitcoin's just the basic full node code is stagnating. Like the fiber network was shut down, right? Like just which is a bad thing. And it's been like an extremely painful process to even get Taproot out, which shouldn't have been as controversial as it was. And SegWit before that was also vastly more controversial than it should have been. And this is a real problem. And Bitcoin today really is very limited in its functionality that it supports on chain, just in terms of like really basic stuff of having like simple things like an identity on chain of any kind, mm-hmm. right? Or supporting colored coins in a way that's on-chain verifiable. Like you can't do these in Bitcoin as it exists today. You can do them in ways which require a full node to validate things, but you can't do them in ways where the actual coins themselves can know that they're interacting with the real thing and not some fake. And it turns out you can add this functionality to Bitcoin in a way that's very, very consistent with the ethos of Bitcoin, like keeping the Bitcoin principles and values in place. You can make it capable of supporting that type of functionality. But we only know that that's possible because I've gone ahead and done it in this other system. And it required some real insights to figure out how to do that. And it's not clear whether it's possible. The technical hurdle of figuring out what the insights are for what the roadmap is to make that happen has been more or less cleared out now. But the political process to add, whether it's will ever be possible just for political reasons to get that kind of functionality added in via even just a soft fork, is very unclear right now.
Okay, there's this phenomenon where a product or a service gains additional value as more people use it, known as network effects, right? Bitcoin is a monetary network, which I believe has a network effect in the monetary aspect of it. So for each dollar that enters into the market, it provides additional value to the existing dollars within the current network. Deeper and deeper liquidity, essentially, right? So this is why Michael Saylor, who's got billions of dollars, wants to put it into Bitcoin versus, say, Chia or some other coin, right? So if you're Carl Icahn, you have $20 billion net worth, you decide I'm going to put in $5 billion, $2 billion, you're going to go wherever the deepest liquidity is, right? As such, I think that's why I believe Bitcoin will continue to be the most dominant for the foreseeable future. Possibly over time, it may be controlling over 95% or more of the monetary value. Similarly, we've seen this with other network models like YouTube we've talked about, or Facebook or Google or Amazon, these network effects, right? there's nothing differentiated or that defensible from a technological perspective on YouTube. I mean, they did what I did and then they took off. And when they took off and they hit their tipping point, it hit critical mass. And as a result of that, as we talked about it, their network externality took hold. And you could have the better technology on this. It doesn't matter. So it's very, very difficult. At the end of the day, network effect essentially is a sense of a moat or defensibility for a product or service. So it's difficult, in my opinion, Bram, if not impossible, to displace the incumbent with true full saturation of network effect. And that's why I'm trying to understand how you think you do that with Chia. How do you supplant that?
Well, there's a few things going on. First of all, you kind of see two sets of use cases today. There's kind of the Bitcoin use cases and the Ethereum use cases, right?
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is simple money and not claiming to do anything other than simple money.
Store value, right?
Yeah. Well, store of value is like talking about tires or something, right? Like it's not money if it doesn't have a list of pieces of functionality, where store of value is one of those, but it doesn't.
Well, it's an evolution towards that. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I just had last week. I had VJ Boyapati on, right? Bullish case for Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
and we went through this entire, bullish case where he talks about the history of money and the evolution of it becoming money. It's clearly money now. It just doesn't have all of the attributes for medium of exchange, but you don't. It starts off as a collectible, and then it moves into store value, and then it moves to a medium of exchange as you have more participants over time.
And maybe I'm being pedantic, but savings and investment are a use case. Store of value is a piece of functionality, is a feature. So you have these different use cases. So people don't use Ethereum as money at all, really. It doesn't make any claims to actually being useful as money. It's not like you have Ethereum ATMs or anything like that. It's like there's a lot less. And now Chia supports all this stuff. It has much less built-in things. It has much less hardware support, much less wallet support, way less exchange support. So obviously a lot of real world entrenched things we're still behind, and we don't have as much smart contract stuff written yet as Ethereum does. But on a technical level, it's just a matter of building that up and getting there. Now, it's much harder to get over the network effects for Bitcoin than it is to get over the kinds of functionality that like Ethereum provides. Now, Ethereum is kind of a horror show as far as a development environment goes. Like Solidity is optimized to make it so a web developer can hack together something that kind of looks like it works really, really fast, which is a feature, but it results in a lot of bricked funds, a lot of money that just goes down the tubes all the time with the whole thing. And so with Chia, what we're shooting for in the short term is getting inroads by supporting that kind of stuff, by making it so that we have like asset tokenization, right? In a way that's, not as environmentally wasteful as it is when you do it on Ethereum, but also makes it so that those tokens are actually self-custody. They're not just sitting in some accounting system on the chain, but they're actual coins that you yourself have in your own wallet, and supporting the actual exchange of them better so that we have offers, so you can have direct over-the-counter exchange between any two assets that are tokenized on top of Chia. That general like interoperability and reliability of and self-custody of everything that's done on top of it. And we're kind of shooting much more immediately for the kind of smart functionality. In the case of Chia, smart coin functionality, rather than the simple money stuff. And I think it is possible to have big differentiators in simple money, but they're really unsexy. And so unfortunately, people don't get excited about them. The things that are really important there that matter are things like having like rate limited wallets and wallets where you can have clawbacks and distributed identities and making it so you can have a pay to a distributed identity. And these kind of things where they're really security measures so that you can self-custody rather than trusting some third party to hold on to your stuff, just from a pure security standpoint. Something in between having a hardware wallet that you yourself own, where if you physically lose that or it gets destroyed, your money is bricked, versus having, completely 100% trusting some third party with your funds. You want something where it's like, well, I control it completely, but in the case of me losing it, there's this process that can be gone through where I can recover my funds, right? That would be a very good thing for people to have. But people don't get excited about that. People don't go, oh, wow, that's so amazing. I really need that, even though that is what you need. That's very important functionality that's central to actually being good money. So you don't have this feeling like you're carrying around suitcases full of $100 bills. But that's a longer process for people to get really excited about it, where the more smart functionality is something that it's much easier to get immediate deployment of.
But I'm asking you something slightly different. I'm saying that as a monetary network, right? It has all the money, and it perpetually will continue to have more money. And how do you supplant that? I don't see how that's possible. Do you think that's possible? I know you're laughing at the store value thing, but it matters to money. Money is what matters here.
And I'm saying that you, in order to get people using something else, they have to have some reason to use the something else. There absolutely are network effects for Bitcoin. I don't believe there are particularly meaningful network effects for Ethereum right now. And Ethereum has gone up a lot in value. That's a much easier
because of the
thing
NFT space, yeah,
and other things. But NFT is tokenization.
Yep, usage of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so that's a much easier thing to go after.
But if you can supplant that, then somebody could supplant you, right? So if that's the case,
well, you have to be a certain amount better, right? We were talking about how you have things like Google and Amazon, where no one supplanted them, not because there's some law of physics reason why they're unsupplanable, but just because they're these great systems that get ongoing maintenance that that they did this to others, right? Like before Google, there was
Yahoo.
There was Alta Vista and Yahoo, right? Before,
but they were directories. They weren't really a great algorithm.
But before Facebook, there was MySpace, and
they didn't have the true network effect, though. They didn't have that network effect.
Oh no! These had network effects. It's just they were
not to the extent. We have to look at the internet audience, which we talked about earlier, and then you look at the percentage that they had, and as the internet audience was growing, it was obvious that they could have been displaced, which they were.
Oh, well, they were. So these were incumbents that really, really sucked.
Particularly Jonathan Abrams for Friendster, the Friendster effect we used to call it. It was crashing every night for like 2 hours.
Yeah. He
opened the door for people to come. I mean, he could have been what Facebook is, but they just didn't have the technology right.
Yeah, well, he kind of knows that. So it wasn't. There were a lot of problems at Friendster.
It's not a secret. Yeah, it's not a secret what happened.
Yeah. But it wasn't. I don't want to. I know Jonathan Abrams, and he is well aware of many bad things that were going on, and he's trying to fix it. Yeah.
Great guy. I'm not taking anything away from him. I actually look up to the guy. I think he's a great guy. But they had some technological issues of how they were connecting people and showing it, and it was a problem.
But and the same thing is true of Yahoo and Alta Vista as well.
But by the way, just let's just take a step back. Let's just pause. If you think about Friendster, right, there was a technological bug essentially within their platform, which opened the door for MySpace to come in. MySpace didn't have the right UI, which opened a door for Facebook. It wasn't too complicated and complex and messy, and Facebook was simple and clean. And from a UI perspective, some of these things matter, right? So they didn't have massive network effect. They had like maybe 50 to 100 million users, which was a lot, but it was not to the extent of where Facebook had 3-point-some billion people today. That's going to be tough to supplant. That's a tough one.
I think the Facebook user base would be a lot more willing to jump ship than you think. People like setting up social networks. It's kind of the most fun thing, is connecting with friends on them. And there are things now, like there's Instagram, which Facebook owns, but are a separate thing. For a while, Snapchat was doing pretty well, not so much now. There's TikTok, which has really blown up.
No doubt.
It requires constant diligence.
I said mostly because of copyright. It was Musical.ly basically.
There's a lot of interesting things about TikTok, but I think we're at a point now, if you're looking historically, like the potential market for like digital native money is vastly larger than where it is today. It is not the case that Bitcoin really is a permanently entrenched player.
Yeah, I would say the market opportunity for Bitcoin is $1 to $200 trillion addressable market, and they're at like 1%, maybe 50 basis points of market size. So from that perspective, I would say that they don't have. If they were like 20 trillion, I would say it's absolutely impossible. I still think it's probably impossible unless you have something that comes forth that says this is where we need to go. But let me just go back to this. American Hodl said something to me earlier this year, and I think it's just brilliant. And I've been telling people this. I really think it's brilliant. He says that, I always said network effect because I come from social media back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and then I had an advertising network. And so to me, I'm very familiar with network effects, right? Very, very familiar. When I first started building that shit, I had no idea what the hell it was. Just kind of like realize it as you're going, right? I understand what network effect is. I understand how it becomes a defensible model for your business. And I kept saying this, and Hodl says to me, he's like, yes, Bitcoin is a monetary network though. So it's not about the number of users. Think about the people as nodes essentially, right? It's not that for the nodes for the people. It's the nodes of the dollars, right? So every dollar that keeps coming in, where does the other dollars? So a guy like Michael Saylor, he's not one node, he's billions of nodes. So every time you get and by the way, something like 90% of the wealth is controlled by, I forget what percentage, it's a very small percentage of the actual entities and or people in the world. It's kind of like the 2080, right? But it's worse than that. It's more like 95.5, right? So you just have to convert that. And that's what's happening. So as that continues to convert, it doesn't matter how many people, how many actual, not nodes for devices, people join as nodes. It matters of the money. So you could have 1 billion people join the Chia network or any network, and they're not going to bring the kind of money that the small number of institutions will bring into Bitcoin.
Well, we have this very funny thing right now that one thing that cryptocurrencies have not done is get rid of the fact that a lot of the world is beholden to a handful of gatekeepers. It's just they're a bunch of cryptocurrency exchanges rather than a couple of banks, right? Bitcoin has a certain amount of network effects today. It absolutely does. I'm not going to claim I have some foolproof plan that I have some magical, here's my, viral marketing shtick
for the scalability, right.
Yeah. Make this win out. It's just arrogant and stupid to make any such silly claim. No, what I'm claiming is I have built something which has, in a very real way, better technology.
Right.
That is really directly based off of all of Bitcoin's core principles.
It's funny because I come from the background that you have being in the tech world, right? So I look at things from a technical perspective too. It took me a while to see that Bitcoin is not about the technology per se. I mean, it has to work. Don't get me wrong. It does work though. It's been proven to work. It's secure, right? So from that perspective, I hate to say it, it's like Microsoft versus Apple, good enough versus perfect, right? And at the end of the day, the good enough was what won for the most market share in the beginning. Over time,
for a while.
Over time, it didn't. You're right. Yeah, but that's because it mattered about how many people, not the dollars. Once the dollars go into that network, it's hard to move the dollars out of the network in a monetary network.
Yeah. Well, right now we're at a point where the future is unclear, as it often is. Yeah. Where Bitcoin. I think the thing that is Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency space is not going to disappear, right? There is a real thing definitely. There that can enable real commerce that's going to get bigger in the future. But as far as how that will evolve, it may continue to be dominated by Bitcoin, or it may not. That's not clear at this point.
But let me pause you right there. Hold. You could make a statement like that, but we got to dissect how would that happen if they got replaced? What would they replace? So the barrier to cost of exit, forget about the barrier to entry. Entry's easy, right? To leave, I'm taking a risk to go somewhere else with my capital if I have a lot of capital.
Well, you could also see, price swings.
Hold on, let's think about the store value, right? You have it's durable, it's portable, it's fungible, it's verifiable, divisible, scarcity, clearly scarce, right? You can have all these things on another coin. It's been replicated 10,000 times, right? Established history, you can't replicate. It's got going on 13 years in January, and then the censorship resistancy of it, because at that point, The other thing is like the centralization. I want to read something to you, right?
Well, no, I have better decentralization. I can definitely make the claim to have that engineered much better.
Let me just read what Satoshi himself said, right? He wrote in an email to Hal Finney. He said, governments are good at cutting off the heads of centrally controlled networks like Napster, but pure peer-to-peer networks like Tor, for example, right, seems to be holding their own. Your company, BitTorrent, right? There's a difference between the protocol and the company.
First off, with Tor, I have to interject here because I know the people who do Tor.
Sure.
And actually, the original Tor protocol was basically something I scribbled on a napkin. It was based off something I scribbled on a napkin. Not literally a napkin, but
I got you.
To that. The Tor is actually a small group of developers who get, I don't know if they do today, but in the past, they have gotten quite a bit of funding from the US government.
But let's talk about Napster. Forget about what you're familiar with. What about Napster, right? They came after Napster. And the movie industry came after your business, right? And you had issues with that. So when you have a centralization of some sort with an entity, a leader, a business, it could really, like you said earlier, it impeded your ability to innovate because you had to deal with a lawsuit. So if that's the case, isn't that a challenge?
Well, in the case of BitTorrent, it impeded my ability to get rich off the thing.
BitTorrent still lives, right?
But it still lives. Yeah, and it's still very entrenched, right? But
it impedes growth if you're an entity that's controlling the narrative for the development, right?
Yeah. So you don't do that. Like I keep saying, I believe in all this stuff. Like Chia is specifically designed so that there's this Chia, the company, which doesn't, technically speaking, run the show. That like everyone at Chia, the company, could just like blip off the face of the earth tomorrow. And the network would continue to run. It would keep functioning.
Like Satoshi disappeared and it continued. Same idea.
Yes. Yeah. Now, there would be a lot less funding for ongoing development on top of it. And that would not be healthy for the network. But it would continue to run. That it really is no nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We don't do like our regularly scheduled hard fork. We don't do that. This is Nakamoto consensus. This is soft forks, if that, for network upgrades, and mostly just we got it all set up ahead of time so that we don't really have to do consensus upgrades basically ever.
So, okay, let me read something to you another quote here from Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, right? Famously said in a Stanford lecture, competition is for losers. He said, all happy companies are different. Each one earns a monopoly by solving a unique problem. All failed companies are the same. They fail to escape competition. You're literally entering into a market with 10,000 competitors. Why are you doing that?
Well, on some level, the answer is I like making really great technology.
You're a techie. I get it.
Yeah, there's really interesting and deep technical problems here. Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, there are lots of competitors who are doing Me Too things, and usually they're step backwards. Like the vast majority of them are doing proof of stake bullshit. That's just garbage, right? And like even VCs, you talk to them and they think you're doing something weird if you're not doing exactly what Ethereum did, right? Like that Ethereum is the model to go. And I try and explain, no, we're doing what Bitcoin did. We're like actually replicating the Bitcoin thing and doing it that way using that model.
But I scratch my head though, and I say to myself, you're competing with the network that has the network externality if you're saying you're doing what Bitcoin did. And you said before, we're doing more like the Ethereum kind of thing.
But we figured out how to do smart contracts, which Bitcoin is not doing at all. So in that sense, it's pretty differentiated from there.
I have this basic thesis when I make an investment, which is I call it DSD, differentiation, scalability, defensibility. So are you different? Why do I care? Why does the user care? What's your go-to-market? What's your scaling plan? How do you scale this thing? And if you get there, right? Like my thing was scaled in 2004, 2005, then YouTube came and competed and it wasn't that technologically differentiated and they had a better UI, better tech. They never had downtime, by the way. That was the number one thing I would say about YouTube is they never went down. I mean, there was crazy architectural side. It was great. That when they got to scale and massive critical mass, that in and of itself became their moat, right? That is the network effect, right? So thinking of Chia from the DSD model, clearly, in a sentence or two, can you tell me the differentiation, the scalability, and how you'll be defensible?
Differentiation. Well, these are pretty straightforward. So differentiation is in two forms. Number one is having a Nakamoto consensus that's more decentralized and less wasteful, and more secure as a result of those things. And also having an on-chain programming environment that keeps the auditability, security, and reliability of the UTXO model that Bitcoin has, while enabling smart coin functionality on top of it. So that's the differentiation.
Okay.
And what was the next one?
Scalability. How will it scale?
I'm not sure if you mean on a technical level scalability or not. We have
the network, for this to scale, because that will lead to defensibility if you hit the network effects at some point. So how do you?
Oh yeah, well, we've already scaled quite a bit. I mean, the Nakamoto consensus things by their nature scale quite a lot. We have over 100,000. I think it's like 200,000 or 300,000 full nodes on the network right now. There's like around 35 exabytes of net space out there. So it's already scaled quite a bit there. And a lot of potential for doing more so, that you get all these hard drives that are just getting crushed up and destroyed when they're end of life, and those could instead be repurposed towards farming of the thing. And there's a lot more end users who have a desktop that could be earning them, some pennies per day for not just run this stuff, and you'll be earning something off the space that you already bought and is just sitting there. And in terms of transaction rate, it can support far more than it's doing right now. That it can support around 20 transactions per second, making assumptions which lead to Bitcoin making around 5 transactions per second. It supports around 20.
And I just want to be real clear. I'm sorry, let me be clear about this, because we have different perspectives possibly. So I'm not saying the technological infrastructure's scalability within this. I'm saying to scale it, it's a monetary network. So how do you scale into being $500 billion in market cap or $1 trillion, or how does that happen?
Yeah. So our immediate plans in terms of getting lots of usage are around tokenization, particularly things like carbon credit tokenization. Mm-hmm. So people who have the ability to tokenize these carbon credits they have don't, generally speaking, want to tokenize them on a chain that's backed by burning electricity. That kind of defeats the purpose. And so they tend to like the Chia story of being a green Nakamoto consensus blockchain. And we, first off, we support direct tokenization on chain, which Bitcoin doesn't. And then on top of that, we support direct exchange, over-the-counter trades, just with no third party in the middle, between any two people who want to trade these two tokenized assets that are both on chain. So it's a much better way of having these very efficient, liquid exchanges of all of these things, which is the whole point of tokenization, is to make that happen. That's the kind of stuff we're going for immediately. And then there's a list of other things that can be done in terms of having third-party oracles that are reporting things on chain, because you can do nice features like make it so that someone can offer someone else money if they make a certain thing happen in a certain database that's reported on chain, because they both lightly trust this oracle that reports this stuff. And so someone can commit funds that will go to this other person if this update to the database happens. So that can be done as well. There's obviously a lot more functionality with NFTs can be done as well. There's potential with on-chain gaming as well. I have put some thoughts into how you could do poker on chain, which would be kind of neat. Some of these are bigger, some of these are smaller. These are all things that can be served much, much better than they're currently being served, I think. That you can get for the people who are making the decisions, like we were talking about with BitTorrent, that the person who made the file available was the one who made the decision to use it, and whoever wanted to use that followed suit. You have these things of, you have someone who's issuing an NFT, you have someone who's doing a carbon credit tokenization issuance. Those are the people who make the decisions. You don't really have to to get these things to happen. You don't have to appeal to the Twitter horde. You have to appeal to the people who are making these decisions.
So you keep talking about the differentiation from a technical perspective, but for the adoption of the money to come into the monetary network, we're not talking about the masses of people. We're talking about a small select, where most of the capital is held, is by a small number of entities and/or persons on this planet. So they're not going to jump into a new coin, right?
There needs to be something that's generating demand, right? So in terms of getting Bitcoin whales to start picking up Chia, the message that I've gotten really is that this has become a matter of like loyalty to the cult, right? For a Bitcoin whale to purchase Chia would be viewed as immoral and
maybe for the maximalists, but like if you're really concerned about your capital, you'd want to go where the most liquidity is for your capital, and knowing that it's protected by the network effect of the monetary network of all the money being there.
Yeah. There's definitely some of that going on, and I'm not claiming that I have a magical answer to that. That's some glib like, oh, here's my one weird marketing trick that magically gets past network effects. That would be dumb for me to claim that I had any such thing. And VCs, when they're like talking to you when you're pitching, will ask questions like that really just to be jerks. They're just gotcha questions. And when you answer honestly, like, well, that's a hard problem, and here's the approaches I'm taking to it, they just act dismissive because they're, I don't know, trying to make you cry or something. It's kind of
trying not to lose their money.
No, often they're just jerks. They're like, I mean, they're people. These are people where if I worked for their firm, I would be their boss, right? Like that they're junior people who haven't really accomplished anything in life other than becoming VCs. And so they like acting superior too.
Yeah, I never liked the traditional VC from B school, right? I like the Reid Hoffmans of the world, the Josh Koppelmans, the Raj Kapoors, the Chamath Palihapitiyas. Like all these guys they're entrepreneurial, right? So those are the VCs that I respect. Yeah. And by the way, some of them are like Fred Wilson's. He's a great VC. I mean, I don't think he's ever been a tech founder, but he figured it out.
Yeah, but there definitely are a lot of VCs who just like being jerks in meetings. And the thing is, any idiot can sound like they're really smart when they're just being dismissive of what someone else is saying. It's very, very easy to act dismissive. That's an easy thing to do. But I'm not claiming that there are no network effects in the world and that they're hard and that they're not hard to overcome. There absolutely are network effects. They absolutely are hard to overcome. And in order to do that, you need to have something that's not just a little bit superior. You have to have something that's vastly superior. So I could have shipped something in like 2017 easily, but I didn't, because I wanted to build the right thing. I wanted to do everything right. I mean, everything across the board right, in terms of having a superior consensus algorithm, which is really hard to come up with. Like that was a lot. Like I'm always telling people, don't invent new math here anywhere on your product roadmap. It's a really bad idea. And I'm a total hypocrite. I literally have had invent new math here on my product roadmap. I got away with it, but I tell people not to do it. That it's come up with a new consensus algorithm, a new on-chain programming environment, figure out the necessary tricks in order to make it possible to do all this advanced functionality within what is essentially the UTXO model, build out some examples of that so you're a few iterations in before you launch the network, so that you're not going to be having to do hard forks because you realize you did it all wrong. Like I've actually gone in and done all of this work, and it took years to get here to launching the network earlier this year, because I wanted to do it all right. And it's necessary if you want to succeed on technical superiority. It has to actually be really technically superior. Like, like the comparable between like Google and Alta Vista, or between or between Facebook and MySpace, things like that, where there's a really big gulf just in terms of quality and functionality of what they are. And I think that gulf, if you compare, I think that gulf is bigger between Ethereum and Chia than it is between Bitcoin and Chia, just because Ethereum is claiming to do a different thing than Bitcoin is. Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin, because it's set its goals to something a lot more prosaic, it's a lot harder to outdo it. at those goals, where Ethereum is claiming to do something very grandiose and is just a real horror show of the development environment in terms of how things work on it.
Is it true that Len, your buddy, did he fail to convince you to release BitTorrent under an alias? Is that a true story?
Yeah, he was telling me I should do that. He tried to get me to release BitTorrent pseudonymously, and I just, as a matter of living my life a certain way, wasn't going to do that because
Is that why you also didn't go synonymous with Chia? Like, why didn't you do Chia that way? You could have replicated the Satoshi thing like all over again. Like,
no. So Chia is a much more ambitious project, right? So BitTorrent was something I could implement myself.
Yeah.
Right. I could implement something that kind of worked over the course of like a year, very much like how Satoshi did his thing, that it was a project that was small enough in scope that one human can make something that kind of works reasonably-ish for it and get that ball rolling and started. Chia's not like that. I mean, some small fraction of Chia maybe, but the grand scope of everything that Chia does, like the problem is you're starting with this plateau of functionality that is Bitcoin, and then you're trying to improve on that. And many people have tried this and just failed miserably when people like try and make like ASIC resistance and things like that. That just doesn't work at all. Like there's like really deep problems of things that really need to be done right. So there was a combination of like several years of my own personal work were necessary in order to get this to work well. And then I needed a whole team of people.
So there's no way you could have done this like on the cyberpunk kind of
message boards
or
no, it just needed time and a budget that was way beyond what could possibly have worked there.
You thought about it and it just wasn't possible.
Yeah, it wasn't going to happen.
I wasn't sure if there was like some ego-ish feeling of some sort that you wanted to be known for building something amazing too. Because like part of that is driven, we're humans, right? So there's something there. Like we talked about it earlier, you always wanted to build something with a legacy, right? I did too. So I don't blame anybody for that, but
I don't need my name attached to it. Like,
well, you'll know that you
doesn't matter. Like I have a certain amount of fame that I don't know. If my level of fame had ever resulted in me like getting a date with a Hollywood actress, maybe I'd be a lot more excited about it. But
that's probably not going to happen for the tech guys. Right?
No, really. I have a lot of fans. They are ludicrously overwhelmingly male.
Well, listen, I'm a fan, Bram. I think what you've done with BitTorrent and your career has been phenomenal. I really, really, truly appreciate you for coming on the show today. Thank you for spending time with me to tell your story, to talk about Chia and what you're working on. Where can people find you? Just tell everybody where they can find you, what you're doing.
Well, I'm on Twitter. Handle is Bram Cohen. My company's website is chia.net. If you're an engineer, you can come to chialisp.com. Chia.net also links to our Keybase channels where we have our community and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you once again, everybody. Bram Cohen.
Thanks, everybody.